Back. It's a great Monday morning, and it's always great to start your day with yourstory.com. But it's never better and it's never late to save than with Wisely, right?
Absolutely.
Guys,
Absolutely.
Nihar, Vijay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vishal.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to know that Nihar, you're a behavioral scientist. Would you call yourself one or an economist?
Certainly not by trade, but certainly evolving and trying to learn through the experiences that we've had over the last year and getting deeper and deeper into that topic.
And Vijay, you're a serial entrepreneur.
Absolutely. This is the third one. Mm-hmm. It seems like, being able to create something and grow, and the whole habit of making that happen again and again is not going to go away, right? Once
Fantastic.
You taste it, it's going to be a repetitive process.
This is a father and son duo. They've gotten together to build a savings companion. It's called Wisely. Who wants to go first? Who wants to tell us about what Wisely is?
Yeah, I can certainly start with that. I think before we get into what Wisely is, a good backdrop to give some context.
Yes, please.
If you really think about it, our relationship with money, that's something that's always evolving, right? It's a relationship, it's a journey. And if you really think about it, every single financial journey, as we've observed and as we've seen, has really started with saving. The first thing you do when you go to a bank is you open an account and you put money in it. That's your first relationship. That's your first instance with saving.
Correct.
So we felt that this was the first step and the most foundational step in building something of a very compassionate, companion-oriented, empathetic financial relationship with customers. So we said saving is the key. That's the first step, and we really want to be that companion, that sort of handheld, personalized tool that really helps our customers build that saving habit into what would and could become a very fruitful financial relationship in the future.
Fantastic. Vijay, you had a lovely point. Indians used to save a lot.
Correct.
But over time it's dropped a bit.
Right.
It used to be 33% in 2008 and 10,
right,
and must have dropped significantly after that. Why do you think that's happened? And we'll come down to why you want to stratify savings and why it's important.
Right.
But can you tell me why it's dropped?
Absolutely. I think at a macro level, it's very clear, right? From a macro trends point of view, there are many temptations. Whether you are in your 30s or 40s or 20s or 50s, it doesn't matter. You're exposed to several temptations. What used to be in the 30s has dropped to 20s. And the latest statistic, in fact, it was quoted by E.T. Prime. And E.T. Prime is talking about 10%, slightly over 10% amongst the millennials. Everything that article talks about is a validation of our hypothesis and thesis. Our thesis has been, if we can instill saving discipline amongst the younger generation, we can actually change the way India saves, right? It's the younger generation that's going to be the future of this country, and we are after helping the younger generation change the way India saves. And how we can do that? We can do that by establishing that first financial relationship, and that starts with saving. And the way we are doing is, we are not asking our users to actually not have savings account or any of those FDs and others. Of course you have all that. We're just a companion. It's an add-on to your existing financial relationship that you may already have. And we make it so simple and easy that they can actually start putting money aside and get the first step going.
Okay.
Right? And what our research had also shown, especially amongst this younger generation, right? They have all the aspirations that they want, right? They're fulfilling some of those aspirations through saving, some of those aspirations through borrowing money. And they also, by borrowing money, they're getting into trouble, right? I mean, we see that in the US, we see in many other developed Western countries, and we're not there yet, but borrowing is easy, paying back is difficult, right? And that's going to become more and more prominent as we move on. What we are telling our users is here is a simple way for you to start setting aside small amounts of money, either to make your purchases through saving or make your email payments in a timely manner, because that's how you build credit. Right?
Nice.
We're not talking about either or. You've got to have the right mix.
I like the point that you made, erratic incomes. They're squeezed and they have fixed budgets.
Right.
Millennials suffer from that. Why?
They suffer from that primarily because our relationship with money has a huge cognitive load.
Right.
We don't fundamentally understand the opportunity cost of saving and then spending versus spending and then saving. So I think combining those, or the lack of that, really leads to even a fixed salary month-on-month basis not really being apportioned properly. A simple example, if I have 1 lakh in my bank account, it's very easy to get sort of tricked or sort of get persuaded by the fact that I have 1 lakh to spend. I really don't. A lot of that is already apportioned to rent, it's apportioned to paying my bills, to paying off whatever
food.
EMIs, food as an example. what I'm left with is actually a very different amount. And that entire, the cognitive load and the cognitive understanding required to interpret that in a very effective and I would say prudent way is something that's lacking. And that's not sort of unique to millennials. That's a fundamental human behavior in and of itself.
You want to give that beer example? That was fantastic. Humans are not rational.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think the fundamental basis of economics is that we make rational decisions, but that's a farce. I think the way in which we deal with our expenses, the way in which we deal with our decision making is very unique to ourselves. And one simple example is, in the US as an example, if you go to a baseball game, you pay $10 for a beer. But if you go to the grocery store, you're very reluctant to pay more than $6.99 for a pack of 6 beers. That's a very irrational decision that we make, and that's fundamentally founded on the fact that in our mind, we're stratifying our money into very different pockets.
And you have no control over it.
We have no control. It's completely involuntary. And that's one of the things that Wizely is really trying to help our customers with. That sort of pocketing or that stratification of your money to be able to have control over your savings, control over how you apportion your money. I think that's the key.
Do you want to explain what pocketing money is about?
Pocketing money is simply adding some kind of color or visual representation to certain intents or commitments or purchase aspirations that you may want to dedicate your money towards. You may have a pocket for where you're saving to go on a holiday sometime in the future. You have another pocket which is for emergency. You have another pocket which is paying off your EMIs. And that, just adding that sort of visual representation and hand-holding customers through that journey actually goes a long way in helping them have more control over their money and their savings as well.
Vijay, you got these learnings from Wizely, from your loyalty company, right? The same economics work. People want a reward for doing something, right? And Wizely also rewards people who save. You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah.
You want to come closer because
Sure.
the mic's here.
Yeah. I think, as Nihar had pointed out, the fundamental reason why users use Wizely is not because of reward.
Okay.
They use it because here is a tool that helps them plan, save, and fulfill.
Okay.
Whether it is aspirations in terms of purchases or commitments in terms of making an EMI payment or an insurance payment. Right? These are some examples. At this point in time, we are focusing on short-term aspirations and commitments for a reason, because that is something that's on top of millennial, right? Reward is more a secondary attribute, right? By the way, here is a surprise thing that I'll give you. But they do not do this for the surprise. They do this for, all the basic needs,
already, yes.
and reward happens with that. That was the biggest lesson, even in the case of Payback, where I built and then finally got acquired by American Express, right? So even in that, right, the behavior that we saw was, they keep doing things that they do on a day-to-day basis, right? Just because you give them a reward, they don't change their behavior. When you give a reward, there is a subtle uplift that you would see, and that mattered in that particular business, whether it is in the context of financial services, from a bank using reward program for credit cards, or in the context of retailer, right? What we are talking about here is a very foundational things to human behavior. That has to start with solving that fundamental core need, which is about instilling that lack of discipline is being converted
Correct,
into
but I also
discipline.
like the fact that you guys nudge to save,
Right.
put in some money. And that's amazing, right? And that's completely randomized, and the technology chooses how you save, right? You want to talk about the nudge a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that we've strived towards right from the beginning is how we engage our customers in between their saving transactions. We're used to being engaged at a transactional level, but what happens in between is the key. And that's really the point that Vijay is alluding to. What are those levers, what are those touch points that you can really target the customer with in order to motivate them to do a transaction? We've tried several hundreds of combinations for different micro segments of customers across 3 key pillars, I would say. Content, context, and sentiment. The right combination of these 3 in the right context for a particular micro segment of customers, really what drives them in a very non-monetary way to go and actually save money. That's the key. The whole monetary aspect of the monetary reward is really just the cherry on top. That's really not what drives behavior. It's that right combination of those 3 things.
And you said content, right? What kind of content? I mean, would you say that, Vishal, you put in 100 and probably save for something in the future, and obviously nudge you also to save more and also get some rewards?
Let me put a color to
Yes,
that
please.
question. To the 3 points that he talked about. So here is an example, right? I'm saving for a journey. I'm saving to go on a trip 2 months from now, 3 months from now, right? And the system comes back and tells you, hey, if you're going to go on that journey 60 to 90 days from now, you're trying to save, let's say, 30,000 rupees. On an average, you need to save 400 to 500, right? Fair enough, I start saving 400 to 500, right? And one of the first behavioral attributes that we had identified, which works beautifully well, is if I can remind you by saying, Vishal, you had saved yesterday. Won't you want to save today too? Right? Is the first message that goes out first thing in the morning at 7 a.m.
And it's not very intrusive, or you don't coerce
Nothing,
people.
right?
Yes.
Right? And I'll come back to that particular point. Coercion versus actually subtle
Yes,
motivation, right? When I send you that, you may or may not take an action. If you take an action, great, right? You covered that. That means you are 2 days in a row, you're saving. We call that as a 2-day streak, right? By end of the day, let us say you didn't save. We come back to you and say, you know, by not saving today, you're going to actually miss a streak. And imagine that if you have saved 10 days in a row. In our system, there are people who have saved 100 days in a row, right? The reason that it's important for them is mentally, you know, it's that little nudge that goes out first thing in the morning in motivating you to save and not wanting to. That we call it content. What content to send you is based on the context you're in. Your context may be very different, and other context could be that you are like 1 day away from your milestone, right? The context is you're just a day away from milestone or 10% away from your final goal point, right? And sometimes it could also be you're looking for a mobile phone, or you're looking for a travel or an emergency fund. So we change the context based on what that is.
I just
right?
want to expand on that
Yeah, you
point
should,
a little
please.
bit. He really hit the nail on the head, right? It's the content is really where we excel is by using content that touches upon those critical game mechanics that you're bringing to a savings journey or a savings behavior. Milestones is one, pace is another. Pace in relation to yourself last week, which is a comparison, is another one. Streak, which is your continuous savings, that's another sort of game mechanic that we thrive on. Using content to bridge these game mechanics is what gives those sort of subtle dopamine hits to the customer, which really says, okay, I want to do better than myself, right? I want to do better than I did yesterday.
Which is amazing, Nihar. I mean, it's much better than a bank, which is often very transactional.
Correct.
And you want to talk about why you spent time researching on this. You spoke to about 300, 400 people, and that told you that this is what you got to build, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think one thing that became evidently clear to us was saving, of course, is the first step in the financial journey, and banks really just do it at a very transactional level. They give you an account, they put money in it, but they're really only focused on what happens when you spend money or what happens when a credit or a deposit occurs. We wanted to focus on everything that sort of paints the color, fills in the gaps in between transactions. The things that sort of make you delighted, the things that make you happy, the things that give you a very accurate representation of how you are compared to how you were maybe last week. I think that's the key. Being able to build that relationship, which is a combination of the right communication as well as the right empathetic levers as well.
I want to ask you a difficult question.
Sure.
Now, in this world, in the US especially, your credit scores drop if you don't borrow more, right? You got to keep borrowing, spending, and your credit cards, you need to keep it on a negative balance or whatever, right? If you pay it back early, you don't get a good score.
Correct.
So if you're actually contrarian view to that kind of economy, right? Which is amazing, right? I mean, we'd have to say India was the other side of the logic. Where you save and don't spend a lot. But now we're going through the American route.
Right.
So you guys are a counterbalance to that. You guys are
So
right?
let me address that, right? Having experienced both sides of the equation. First and foremost, that is going to be important for any youngster, as an example, is the right combination of saving and borrowing. We are not against borrowing. We're not against leverage. Leverage is good as long as it is within certain manageable limits, right? Your financial journey doesn't start with borrowing. It starts with being able to save, put small amounts of money aside for whatever purpose that you may have. But giving an opportunity for you to save any amount, any time, for any purpose, including paying off your EMI loans if you have one, is the right thing to do, right? And have some leverage. And leverage actually takes you further. But don't live your month-on-month life based on 60-70% leverage. That's dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of people take the paycheck and leave it by chance, right? I mean, they suddenly don't have any money. At the end of the day, you spend it on TVs, you spend it on washing machine, and your trips, and you then end up borrowing because you don't have any savings. So that's what you want to avoid them to do, right?
we don't want them to avoid anything. We want them to live their life. We want them to live their life with good financial discipline. Where savings
I like that.
becomes...
That's what you got to bring them discipline.
Yeah, we want them to have a good saving discipline and enjoy your life with some borrowing wherever required, putting some money aside for your insurance payments, making sure that you have money for emergencies, making sure you're growing the money once you have the basic
By the way,
discipline.
guys, Wisely lets you pay your EMIs also. So if you've borrowed and you've saved through them, you can actually pay your EMIs.
That's
Am I
right.
right?
That's right. And the users do it today, right? It's just that we're not monetizing it, but that doesn't mean we should monetize. That is something we'll be monetizing.
This is
as
a
we move
great
forward.
blend of Eastern and Western philosophies, right? It's amazing. Where do you think you want to take this in, say, 18 months? I know you have 300,000 downloads at this point of time. Customers?
300 signed up
Customers?
users. Downloads are higher.
And about 25 crore in savings.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to talk about what your strategy is? I know you've gone and raised angel money. You're well capitalized at this point of time. You're a 20-member team. 29-member team. You've got a great tech team. Where do you want to take the product, and where do you want to take the business?
Yeah, I think our vision really is to be honest, is we want to establish ourselves as the personalized saving bank for any youngster, right? That's our vision 5 years from now. We want to make it so simple and seamless for any user to use our platform, actually a youngster point of view. Because if we make it simple for youngsters at this stage of their life, they can actually start their journey with saving. Actually, we'll be able to go along that journey and be able to fulfill many of their personal financial needs over a period of time.
And also have money in the bank.
Now, that doesn't mean I can take that leap today. That leap can happen only with saving as a fundamental foundation. That's where we are focused. And we have several financial products along the way as we move along this journey with the user, right? It may involve working with banks, may involve working with obviously lenders, the insurance companies. It also involves working with some of the device makers, right? Who can actually help us send those intelligent nudges very easily to many of these customers, right? But the core of it is that intelligent nudging.
I think to Vijay's point, this entire stepwise or staggered approach is very intentional. The biggest challenge with today, I would say any generation, but even more with today's generation, is you can't build a macro, mammoth-sized product that does everything on day one. You have to be able to build that proposition in a very stepwise way. Tell them exactly what you're doing right now, and then sort of naturally take them along that progressive path. The moment you go with, I do this, 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 and this, nobody gets it. That's the fundamental challenge with banking today. There's just so much jargon. There's so many different products. I don't know what to make of it. You have to be able to do it in a very linear and progressive manner, whether it's in terms of timing or how you push that proposition to the user. It's intentional from our side to be able to do it in that.
You want to quickly tell us that you're a value-creating company rather than a value-exploitation company.
Yeah, I think that was one toggle that we switched on in a very intentional way when we started, which was really around, do you build a product that charges a fee, that uses the customer as a marketing platform? Do you build a product that's so delightful that the customer wants to pay for it over time? And that's the kind of decision making, or rather, that's the kind of basis that goes into all of our decisions when we actually make decisions at a product level, marketing level, growth level, technology level. That's the key, and that's really what drives a lot of what we do at Wizely going forward and today as well.
And by the way, guys, if you're paying loans, you can also pay them through Wizely. They have partners. But you can reduce delinquencies, which is key, right? Most of the B2B loan guys suffer from delinquency, right?
Right. I think the way to think about this, Vishal, is delinquencies. For some it's high, some of it's low. But the point is, every user, if you can make it easy for the guy to actually say, let's say if he's about to be delinquent, in fact, some of the lenders can actually predict who's going to be delinquent purely based on this past behavior. Right, you can actually work backwards and say, here is a guy who we can actually, simply nudge him to start saving so that he can make the payments on time. Yeah. That's really where our partnership goes. And with insurance companies, it is really about, can I make it easy for him to make that repayment? I would call it renewal. Renewals, especially, are, depending on the size of the company, can vary anywhere between 15 to 20%. For a large company, every 1% is equal to 200 plus crores perhaps. Small, mid-sized companies could be 40 to 50 crores. Can we take advantage of that, right?
So it's good. You're also nudging people to pay their EMIs on time and even the renewal premiums on time. which is another business by itself, right? Which is what you're after. That instead of sending a sales agent and going from street to street and reminding people, the Wizely app can now help them save.
I mean, the way to think about this is the one that underlies all this has not changed. We are only giving a form factor to your saving. Is the form factor about the purchase that you want to make, or making the EMI payment, or saving because you want to take the Coursera course, right? It is only the form factor. We have not done anything other than building a personalized saving companion.
For those of you who want to know how they make money, you can write to them, but they actually make money on transactional fees when you settle your payments or whatever.
That's
right?
correct.
Right, but they're not a wallet company, by the way. That's one distinction I got to make. And by regulation, they can hold money only for 365 days. Can I come back to you after the 365 days? Can I come back to you again?
Well, absolutely you can, but let's make it very clear. The money, let's say you put 100 rupees today. That particular 100 rupees cannot stay for more than 365 days, right? If you put, let's say, you can continuously save. We go through the aging process, right? Any money that is over 300 days, actually, technically speaking, we can give ourselves 300 days because we don't want to hold it until the very last day.
So
we nudge you to take away or spend or fulfill your commitments.
So say January 1st, I put in money. By December 31st, I got to withdraw the money and put it in my bank account.
We'll make sure actually you take away the money.
Well before that.
All right, well before that.
And then I come back again later on to use that. That's
but
nice.
well, I mean, clarification, Vishal, right? But we are only referring. You're always our customer, right? We don't throw you out anything of that sort. But the money that went in on the 1st cannot stay beyond 360 days, or rather December 31st, right? If you have put in money, let's say on February 1st, of course that can stay.
That continues,
right?
It's
because
so it's a cycle.
It's a cycle.
It's a cycle. So it is not about you going away and coming back.
Nice. And how does a father and son duo end up working together?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We at work we don't look at as father and son, right? That's extremely important. That's rule number one. In fact, in the 29 people that we have, I personally know at least the top 7 or 8 people for more than 10 years. Right? The idea behind that is bring together people like-minded who know your strengths and weaknesses and build a company. I always believed in that, right? That's the only way to build a sustainable business over a long period of time. And he being a millennial and he being the one who actually understands the millennial consumer psyche and having strong knowledge of behavioral economics really helps us. For the rest of us who are not in that age group, we are actually building something for a millennial by not being a millennial. But he, and of course, having said that,
but it's great to listen to them, no?
Always listen. Listening is the first thing that you do. As an entrepreneur, if you don't listen to your customer, right, you're in trouble.
Right.
One last point that I want to make sure in behavioral economics, which is extremely critical. When you force someone to do something, especially a youngster, they will never do it. But if you give them tools where they can actually empower themselves to make those subtle moves, it helps. So our intelligent nudging engine relies on that. Everyone talks about SIP. Some of the users, why they don't like putting fixed amount of money every month in that FD or RD account is because you're forcing them.
Correct.
Whereas in this case, they make the call. When, how much.
Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. I think the control is in the customer from day one.
How do you think people 7 years from now will behave? People who are probably 14 now, or probably the Gen Zs they call them. How do you think they'll behave?
See, I think that's the way they're going to evolve is actually a reinforcement of Ajay's point, right? I think discipline and financial discipline is the core of what we're doing, but the key is not to enforce it, right? You have to be able to deliver tools, build that delight factor, build that sort of value creation framework for these kinds of users and these emerging Gen Z users to be able to say, hey, I think this is good for me because I want to use it. I think that's the key. And that comes from empathy and communication, just driving home those two pillars.
Interesting. What are you guys reading?
Right now, what am I reading? More than reading, I've been listening to a ton of podcasts.
Okay, which one? Would you
right
recommend
now,
any?
The latest one that I listened to was FinTech, or Financial Services for the Next 3 Billion People. That's an A16Z podcast, Andreessen Horowitz's podcast. Very interesting. Really talking about sort of how you build these kind of value creation products and these kind of empowering financial products for the new economies.
Fantastic. So that's Andreessen Horowitz that you'd recommend.
Yes.
And you can access it at?
YouTube. Everything's available on YouTube.
Fantastic.
These days, yeah.
Most of my interests are around political fiction, right? Non-fiction, political non-fiction. And a lot of my interests are around understanding what drives people so crazy in the Middle East and and how that impacts the rest of the society. And Oil King is a fascinating book that actually gets into, how oil has become a weapon, right? And then the other books that I read are all related to that, Road to Jerusalem, right? And I'm somehow fascinated with what's happening in the Middle East. From a cultural point of view, how some of these politics have evolved over a period of time.
Fantastic. Those are great suggestions, and you gentlemen are amazing. But you've got audience questions to take now.
Sure.
Okay. This is Saurabh who says, "What are the key challenges you think young people are facing with saving money?"
I think it goes back to the point that I talked about. Our relationship with money is fun. It has a huge cognitive load. We don't know how to understand. We don't understand very well the opportunity cost of making certain decisions with your money. Saving today leads to a lack of spending tomorrow, or spending today leads to a lack of saving tomorrow. We don't get that. I think the key is, how do you build something that really empowers somebody to be able to say, hey, this portion of my money needs to go there, this portion needs to go there, and I need to pocket it in this way accordingly. I think being able to do that kind of stratification in your mind with tools that help you do that, that's the key.
Nice. The next question is probably on blockchain, but I don't know who's going to take this. It's Naveen who says, "What is your take on fully decentralized monetary systems?"
I'm not going to speak at
millennial question.
I'm not going to speak. I'm not going to speak.
I have an answer, but I'll let him answer.
I won't speak at a theoretical level because I wouldn't call myself a blockchain expert. But I think when I look at financial services today, the amount of players and stakeholders that exist in any ledger system, whether it's transferring money from one country to the other, from one bank to the other, it's a very tiresome, complicated process. Anything that can decentralize that process, make things more efficient and cheaper and better, I think that's certainly the key.
So let me answer the question. Add to that, right? One of the areas where there's an immediate need for blockchain, as an example, is when you transfer money from one country to the other country. The fact that you have to wait a couple of days before the money comes into your bank account is a nightmare. We ourselves faced that on a Friday afternoon when we suddenly had an explosion of growth, and we were anticipating, and there was a 3 or 4 day holiday in India, right? We were worried about how we're going to actually sustain that business for the next 3 to 4 days. Of course, we made some arrangements at the last minute, but our money was sitting in the US. We needed to bring it here, and I felt for once, if I had blockchain-driven technology, money movement would have been a lot easier. As simple as how we move money from one account to the other. Of course, within the
What do you mean by bringing money from the US? It was your invested money?
Investors' money, right? It sits in our US corporation. Probably, We usually bring every month or 2 months, but suddenly we needed that extra cash.
Do you see decentralization happen for the monetary system soon, or
I absolutely. In fact, on this point, Vijay's point on movement of cross-border movement of money. So JP Morgan launched the JPM coin just last week. In fact, that's their first. That's their first step into crypto and into blockchain, and that's really geared towards companies that want to make settlements from one country to the other.
In real time.
Nice.
So I'm bullish on it. I think that's a right step in the right direction, especially from JP Morgan, whose CEO was very anti-Bitcoin for the longest time.
Interesting. Naveen, I hope that answers your question, and you guys have been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this video at short notice and surprise. Thank you. I enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Guys, and I'll see you soon. Guys, I'll see you soon tomorrow with a couple of good, interesting topics. Bye, guys. It's a lovely one. Thanks for the record. I didn't know you liked political science.
Oh, I love it. I love political science.